Let me ask you something. When you make a promise to yourself, do you keep it? Not to your boss, not to your family, not to the crowd, to you. Do you keep your word to yourself? Because here's a truth that very few people understand. Your entire life is built on the promises you keep or the ones you keep breaking. Every time you say, I'll wake up early, but hit snooze. Every time you say, I'll start today, but wait until tomorrow. Every time you say, this time I'll follow through, but don't. You're not just delaying your goals, you're weakening your identity. Confidence isn't something you find, it's something you earn by proving to yourself that you do what you say. Keeping promises to yourself is the quiet, unglamorous work that defines who you become. This is not about public declarations or grand gestures. It is about daily private acts that accumulate into real credibility. Every small commitment you honor, the alarm you do not snooze, the single page you read, the brief walk you take, serves as evidence to your mind that you can be trusted. Those tiny pieces of evidence compound until your inner narrative shifts from saying I intend to saying I did. That shift is the foundation of genuine confidence. When your actions align with your words in private, you stop depending on applause or outside validation because you possess internal proof. You begin to trust your ability to follow through, and that trust becomes the engine for bigger changes. Micro-promises require minimal energy but train your system to favor follow-through over avoidance. Habits form through repetition more than through willpower, and the repeated choice to honor small commitments rewires how you respond when temptation or fatigue appears. Because the bar is low, success is more likely, and consistent success fuels momentum rather than discouragement. As momentum builds, so does your willingness to accept tougher challenges because you can point to a record of follow-through. Identity is not given, it is earned through daily behavior. By keeping small promises to yourself, you literally write a new identity, one characterized by reliability, discipline, and integrity. This new identity then governs future choices, making consistency easier and lapses rarer. Conversely, broken private promises quietly erode your self-image. Each unkept commitment whispers that you are unreliable until those whispers become a louder story you tell yourself about who you are. That story is corrosive because it undermines effort and amplifies doubt at the first sign of difficulty. Repairing that damage does not require heroic acts. It requires honest, repeated deposits of follow-through. Start with commitments so small they feel almost silly. 5 push-ups, a 2-minute walk, 1 paragraph written, or a glass of water before breakfast. The point is not the magnitude of the task, but the act of matching your behavior to your word. Every completed promise is a vote for the person you are becoming. Over time, those votes add up to a bank of self-trust you can draw on when stakes increase. When you have a history of keeping your word to yourself, fear and uncertainty lose their power because you have evidence that you will act anyway. That evidence converts anxiety into practical action because your baseline is follow-through, not vacillation. Keeping promises in private also builds resilience. When you show up for small commitments, despite fatigue or distraction, you strengthen your capacity to persist under pressure. You learn to navigate setbacks without collapsing into self-reproach, because your identity is anchored by consistent behavior rather than intermittent success. This steadiness changes how you approach goals. You stop waiting for perfect conditions and instead rely on the practice of showing up. Another benefit is improved decision-making. When your baseline is integrity with yourself, choices that align with your long-term interest become easier because your preferences reflect who you aim to be. You stop bargaining with short-term impulses and instead default to actions that serve your future self, that reduces wasted energy and preserves willpower for genuinely hard problems. Importantly, keeping private promises is not about perfection or moralizing, it is pragmatic. It is a strategy for becoming reliable, confident, and effective. Perfectionist standards only increase shame when you slip, whereas a pattern of small wins builds tolerance, learning, and forward motion. Expect mistakes and treat them as data. What tripped you up? what system failed, and how to adjust next time. Recommitment after a slip is itself an act of integrity and a signal that your transformation is real. Ultimately, the sum of private promises determines the quality of your public life. When you consistently show up for yourself, your work, relationships, and presence in the world reflect that inner alignment. People notice consistency because it signals competence and trustworthiness. But the real reward remains the internal experience of being someone who keeps their word. Start today with one tiny promise, keep it, and repeat the process. Your identity and confidence will follow because they are built, not discovered. Small micro-promises matter far more than people realize because they quietly build the architecture of who you become. Tiny consistent actions, 5 push-ups, reading 1 page, waking up at 6, don't look dramatic from the outside, but they create a deep sense of credibility inside you. Every small promise you keep is a message you send to your own mind. I can rely on myself. I do what I say I will do. And every time you break a promise, even a small one, your mind also notices. You start doubting yourself, not because life is hard, but because you keep showing yourself you aren't dependable. Micro-promises reverse that cycle. They are simple, achievable, and repeatable, which means you can stack wins every single day. Those small wins reshape your identity far more effectively than waiting for motivation or trying to overhaul your life overnight. Think of how habits form, not through intensity but repetition. 1 page turns into 2, 5 push-ups turn into 20, a morning wake-up routine becomes a foundation of discipline. These micro-promises require almost no motivation, but they create momentum, and momentum is powerful. You start to trust yourself, which strengthens your internal voice, which improves your choices, which shapes your results. You stop negotiating with your excuses because you have proof that you can act even when you don't feel like it. The action becomes a habit. The habit becomes a standard. The standard becomes your identity. The beauty of micro-promises is that they bypass perfectionism. Most people fail because they try to start too big. An hour of gym daily, a book a week, waking at 4 a.m. They burn out quickly because their new identity has no foundation. Micro-promises are the foundation. They give you a path you can stick to on your best days and your worst days. They remove the pressure of being perfect and replace it with the simplicity of just showing up. Over time, you don't need to force discipline, it becomes natural. Your brain becomes familiar with the feeling of completing small tasks, and it craves more. You become someone who doesn't talk about improvement. You live it quietly, consistently. These small actions also rewire your self-worth. When you say, I'll do 5 push-ups and you do them, you experience a silent victory. When you say, I'll read 1 page and you follow through, you earn confidence. You stop chasing the approval of others because you're building approval from within. Self-respect comes from keeping your word to yourself, not from external validation. And that self-respect becomes the fuel for bigger decisions, deeper changes, and higher-level discipline. Micro-promises also protect you from overwhelm. Life becomes manageable when you break it into small, repeatable steps. Instead of thinking I have to change everything, you only focus on what you have to do today. The present becomes powerful because it's no longer intimidating. You realize that massive transformation is nothing but the result of hundreds of tiny choices that seemed insignificant at the time. When you look back after weeks or months of following micro-promises, you see real change, not because you had massive bursts of motivation, but because you were consistent in small ways. That consistency builds a solid foundation of trust with yourself, and once you trust yourself, discipline becomes easier, confidence becomes natural, and growth becomes inevitable. Micro-promises teach you that greatness isn't built in big moments. It's built in the quiet repetition of small, honorable actions. The tiny commitments you keep when no one is watching ultimately become the biggest reasons your life changes. The mirror test is one of the simplest but most powerful forms of personal accountability. It means regularly asking yourself, am I proud of how I showed up today? Not in comparison to someone else, not based on external success, and not measured by results alone, but judged purely by your own effort, integrity, and intention. When you look in the mirror at the end of the day, you know the truth. You know if you avoided hard things or faced them. You know if you kept your word or made excuses. You know if you acted from discipline or from comfort. That honesty builds self-respect, because self-respect is not something you receive from others. It's something you earn from yourself by matching your actions to your words. The mirror doesn't lie. You can fool people with your image, your talk, or your online presence, but you can't fool your own reflection. The mirror test forces you to confront who you are becoming through the choices you make. When you ask yourself whether you are proud of how you showed up, you begin to close the gap between your intentions and your behavior. Most people have good intentions. They want to be disciplined, consistent, hardworking, honest, but intentions without action create guilt and frustration. When your words say one thing but your actions show another, you weaken your inner foundation. You start doubting yourself. You lose confidence not because you are incapable, but because you repeatedly show yourself that you don't follow through. The mirror test reverses that downward spiral because it brings your focus back to integrity, not perfection. Every day becomes an opportunity to earn your own respect. You don't need to accomplish something huge. You just need to show up in a way that aligns with who you want to be. Maybe that means making a difficult phone call instead of avoiding it. Maybe it means putting in real effort at the gym even when you felt tired. Maybe it means controlling your reactions, staying calm, or choosing honesty when lying would be easier. These small victories accumulate, and each one strengthens the person you see in the mirror. Over time, the reflection becomes someone you admire, someone you trust, someone you are proud to be. The mirror test also forces consistency. You can't hide behind excuses at the end of the day. You can't say, "I'll start tomorrow," because the mirror brings you back to the only thing you can control today. It cuts through the noise, the distractions, and the stories you tell yourself. It brings clarity. It makes you ask whether the way you acted aligned with your goals, values, and standards. And when the answer is yes, you feel a quiet but powerful confidence. When the answer is no, you feel discomfort, and that discomfort becomes the teacher that pushes you to change. Self-respect is not built from never making mistakes. It is built from being honest about your mistakes and taking responsibility for them. When you fail, the mirror test helps you reset quickly. Instead of running from your shortcomings, you confront them and correct them. You learn to hold yourself accountable in the same way you expect others to be accountable. That kind of internal alignment gives you strength because you no longer need external permission to improve. You hold yourself to a higher standard because you understand the cost of failing yourself is far greater than the cost of failing anyone else. The mirror test shapes your identity. When you consistently show up in a way that makes you proud, your confidence becomes unshakable, not because you're perfect, but because you live in alignment. The way you talk, act, work, and decide all move in the same direction. You stop seeking validation from others because you already have validation from the one person who matters most, yourself. And when you can look in the mirror and honestly say, "I'm proud of how I showed up today," you experience a level of peace, strength, and self-respect that no amount of external approval can replace. Discipline is often misunderstood as punishment, restriction, or something harsh you force onto yourself, but in reality, discipline is one of the highest forms of self-respect. It is not about denying yourself pleasure. It is about valuing yourself enough to choose what serves you over what comforts you in the moment. Discipline is the daily proof that you believe in your own potential. When you show up on time, when you keep promises to yourself, when you follow through on your goals even when no one is watching, you send a powerful message to your own mind. I matter. My future matters. My standards matter. Discipline becomes the evidence that you are worthy of the life you want. When discipline is seen as punishment, it becomes something people avoid. They think of it as structure, pressure, or sacrifice. But when you understand that discipline is simply alignment, your actions serving your goals, it transforms into something empowering. You no longer resist it because discipline is not something that steals your freedom, it's the thing that creates your freedom. Without discipline, you are controlled by impulses, emotions, and circumstances. With discipline, you control your direction. You get to choose how you spend your time, what habits you build, and what future you create. It becomes a gift you give yourself every day. Discipline protects your standards. Every choice either raises or lowers the standard you live by. When you choose discipline, getting up when the alarm rings, sticking to your workout, focusing on your work, saying no to distractions, you reinforce a high standard. You show yourself that your goals are worth the effort. You demonstrate that your dreams deserve a disciplined version of you, not the inconsistent one controlled by moods or excuses. Standards define who you are, but discipline is what keeps you aligned with those standards. Without discipline, standards fade into wishes. With discipline, standards turn into reality. The powerful thing about discipline is that it compounds. Small disciplined actions build into larger ones. When you repeatedly choose the harder right over the easier wrong, you build mental strength. You train your mind to trust you, and that trust becomes the foundation for bigger wins. People often admire massive achievements, financial success, fitness transformations, career breakthroughs, but they overlook the invisible discipline that made them possible. Discipline is the silent engine behind every big victory. It turns ambition into progress and progress into mastery. And the more disciplined you become, the more self-respect you build. Every time you follow through on something you said you would do, even if it's small, you grow in confidence. You no longer need external validation because you are validating yourself through action. You no longer need someone to push you because you've learned to push yourself. Self-respect doesn't come from achievements, it comes from alignment, your behavior matching your values. Discipline keeps that alignment tight, consistent, and unbreakable. Discipline also protects you from your own weaknesses. Everyone has moments of laziness, fear, or self-doubt, but a disciplined person doesn't wait to feel motivated, they act anyway. Discipline becomes a shield against procrastination, excuses, and emotional decisions. It is the anchor that keeps you grounded when your feelings try to pull you in different directions. Over time, discipline builds a powerful internal identity. Someone who can rely on themselves, someone who does what needs to be done, someone who is capable of achieving anything they commit to. Discipline is love directed inward. It is choosing what is right for your growth instead of what is easy for your comfort. It is honoring your future self by making strong decisions in the present. It is understanding that every disciplined day strengthens your character, sharpens your mind, and moves you closer to the life you want. Discipline creates momentum. Momentum becomes progress, and progress becomes transformation. This is why discipline is self-respect, not punishment. It is the foundation that makes every bigger win possible. Follow-through is the muscle of leadership, and it grows every time you finish what you start. People often think leadership is about confidence, charisma, or authority, but the real foundation of leadership is reliability. When you consistently follow through, even on small commitments, you train yourself to be someone others, and more importantly, you can trust. Finishing tasks, completing routines, and honoring responsibilities builds a track record inside your own mind that says, I can rely on myself. That internal trust becomes the backbone of strong leadership long before anyone else notices it. Leadership doesn't start with leading others. It begins with leading yourself. And leading yourself requires discipline, consistency, and the willingness to complete even the unglamorous tasks. When you decide to do something and then follow through, you strengthen your identity. You become the kind of person who doesn't quit halfway, who doesn't hide behind excuses, and who doesn't avoid responsibility. Small acts of follow-through, doing the dishes after cooking, sending the email you said you would send, finishing the workout you started, completing the project before the deadline, build the same mental muscles that big responsibilities require. Leadership is simply those small habits amplified. Follow-through shapes your character more than your achievements do. Anyone can start with excitement or motivation, but finishing requires resilience, focus, and maturity. When things get boring, when challenges show up, when the excitement fades, most people stop. Leaders continue. They push through the moments of resistance, and that ability becomes their superpower. Every time you finish something you started, you build inner strength. You prove to yourself that you don't abandon your commitments when they become inconvenient. That internal reputation becomes the foundation of real confidence, not the loud kind, but the quiet, unshakable kind. Follow through also builds credibility. When people see that your actions match your words, they trust you. They believe in you because you have already demonstrated reliability through your behavior. But credibility doesn't begin outwardly. It begins with how you treat your own commitments. If you constantly break promises to yourself, you subconsciously send the message that your words don't matter. That weakens your confidence and your leadership potential. But when you honor your commitments, your voice becomes stronger and your decisions become more decisive because you trust your ability to execute. Finishing also creates momentum. The more you finish, the easier it becomes to take on bigger challenges. Your brain becomes accustomed to completion. It gets used to closure, to progress, to results.